So since we covered money and banking, today let's talk about the Federal Reserve System. We'll talk about the U.S. Federal Reserve System and the role it has in the economy, in macro. Let's talk first. The U.S. Federal Reserve is a national central bank. It is the Bank of the United States. It is a central bank. It is a public entity. It is government operated. There are private aspects to it, but the Federal Reserve System is federal public operated. So what are the roles of a central bank? What does it do? I'll list 4 of them. These are the 4 main roles of a central bank, and I'll cover other things that it does. First, the federal bank serves as a bank clearinghouse. It is a central clearinghouse for banks around the country. What that means is it allows a central place for banks to clear out transactions or to transact with other banks. So if I write a check from Bank A and pay someone with it, and they do their banking at Bank B, they have to send that check back to Bank A to get paid, right? So here's 5, don't take notes on this, but here's 5 banks, and they all have checks and deposits and money and stuff from other banks. So Bank A would have to send all of its information to all 4 of the others, and Bank B would have to send its information to all 4, and this would be a mess. A much easier way to do this is to have one entity in the middle, right? Now Bank A just has to talk to this. This is much easier. The Federal Reserve System serves as a central clearinghouse for banks to handle transactions. This makes the banking system more efficient, which is something we want. Second, the Fed is a large institution with a lot of money and holdings on its balance sheet that serves as a lender of last resort for commercial banks. It's the lender of last resort. So if a commercial bank gets in trouble or becomes short on cash or needs money to pay out depositors, remember last time we said that using the fractional reserve system, your bank doesn't hold enough money for everyone? If more and more people show up and need their money out, the Fed can serve as a lender of last resort. We as customers know that the Fed is backing our bank, and that makes us feel better. It gives us confidence in the banking system, and we feel positive, and our positive expectations, we've talked about the roles of expectations, are better, and we feel better about our banking system. That makes us more confident, more willing to use the system. We feel good about our banks. The next 2 things we talk about, the Federal Reserve, are what we call their dual mandate. The dual mandate of the Fed, and that is to maintain stable prices, so keep inflation and deflation under control. and to minimize unemployment. We want the bank to maintain stable prices and minimize unemployment. This is the dual mandate of the Fed. The two things that we say it is by law required to do. How do they maintain stable prices? And what does a bank have to do with making sure everyone has jobs? We'll talk about that. Because the bank sort of serves as an economic clearinghouse of the U.S. But I also want to talk about three things that are not the role of the Fed. Three things the Federal Reserve does not, in fact, do. They do not handle our currency and our actual bills and coins. This falls under the Treasury. It's under the Department of the Treasury. Actual currency production is under the Department of Printing and Engraving. Department of Printing and Engraving, which falls under the U.S. currency. This is where we get into the mint. So it does not handle currency. The Federal Reserve does not regulate the stock market. At least not in any direct way. If you're a stockbroker, you don't register with the Federal Reserve. You register with the Securities and Exchange Commission and FINRA. So this is the SEC, not Southeastern Conference, Securities and Exchange Commission. The Federal Reserve does not quote unquote control the economy. Nobody does that. There is no economy czar. There is no central planner. There is no price setter. No one does this. The Fed does not control the economy. The Fed has a very limited mandate and very limited tools at its disposal. A little bit of history behind the Fed. This is at least the third central bank the U.S. has had. During the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress printed money. The Continental Congress printed paper money. At the time, in the late 1700s, paper money was considered novel. Paper money was crazy talk. At that time, money was coins, and the coins were typically made of precious metals. So the coins were gold and silver and precious metals. So if someone paid you in a coin, and sometimes you wanted to give them change, you'd bend it a little bit, break it in half, and hand half the coin back. Gave them change, because the coin itself is valuable. The coin has intrinsic value, like we talked about in money and banking. Matter of fact, if that was still too much, you could take the half of the coin and hand them back that part. And that part of the coin is how much of it now? A quarter, which is where we get our quarter. You could take a quarter and fold it and hand it to someone and break a quarter into half, and that would be a bit. It was called a bit. Where we get the nursery rhyme, 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, $1. A bit is 8. You have a whole coin in half again, 8 bits. Computer science people, how many bits make up a byte? 8. This terminology stays with us. This was how you would make change out of metal coinage. Paper money during the Revolutionary War was crazy talk. And it didn't work out very well because there was no functioning continental government. We were having a war to have a government. So the only thing that this money was backed by was maybe tax receipts that we might collect in the future if we win and if we form a government. So this money failed spectacularly. The price of it dropped, its value dropped constantly, and they were worth nothing. The phrase started out as useless as a continental. And England knew that this was happening, and they thought we're going to pile on, so they dumped the market full of counterfeit money. It's just paper. We have a printing press. I don't know what to do here. Let's screw these guys. And they dumped fake money. So from this point on, the U.S. has a bad taste in its mouth for central banks. The U.S. has a bad taste in its mouth for paper money. We got screwed by it once, and we're not going to fall for that again. Alexander Hamilton, who appears on the $10 bill, was a large proponent of a central bank. Hamilton, who first determines the denomination of our currency, by the way. Hamilton is why our bills are in 1, 5, 10, and 20s. Exceptional mathematician. Fascinating guy, if you ever want to read about one of the lesser-known founding fathers. On the $10 bill, not a president. Just like Franklin on the 100, not a president. Hamilton came up with basically designed the U.S. economy. But fascinating dude, if you want to read about it. It's a Hamiltonian idea to have one central clearinghouse of a bank. Thomas Jefferson completely, adamantly opposed. Adamantly opposed to one central bank. Thought it would be too much power in the hands of government. 1913, our current Federal Reserve is founded. Founded in 1913 as a result of several shocking panics. The second Federal Reserve, or the second Bank of the United States, closed right around the time of the Civil War. And between the Civil War, between about 1863 and almost 1890, really 1907, is what we call the free banking era. And this is when effectively any state was issuing currency. Individual states are issuing currency, maybe backed by gold or silver or what have you. Individual banks are issuing currency. Currency may be different from one state to the next. Price levels may be radically different from one state to the next. This causes several bank panics. The price level in this time fluctuates wildly. Wildly. You could have 20, 30% inflation and deflation every year. Just madness. So the era of free banking was not shockingly positive. Really, 1907 was a monstrous bank panic. Really no way to run an economy. Just a crushing bank panic. And in 1913, we finally get a Federal Reserve. Starts out as a very Republican idea, and I can't remember the senator who had his name on it. Alchin, started with an A, I think. But a Republican senator proposes this and says we're going to have a central bank, and it's, he got together with basically Wall Street and financial markets and said, how do we design this central bank so it works? And Democrats said, this is awful, you're running this for Wall Street, you're running it for the big bankers, and it doesn't help that the senator proposing it is John D. Rockefeller's father-in-law. It's John D. Rockefeller's father-in-law, who's a senator who proposes a grand scheme of national banking. Then there's an election, 1912, the presidency changes hands, a Democrat takes over the presidency and says, hey, this central bank thing doesn't look like such a bad idea after all. So now all the Democrats jump on board and the Republicans jump off. And effectively the same plan is passed in 1913 as the Federal Reserve Act. It's really in response to just madness in the banking sector. All right? So let's skip ahead to now and let's talk about the structure of today's Federal Reserve. The structure of today's Federal Reserve, it's made up of 12 regional banks around the country. And I'll show you a map of these. 12 regional banks. The state of New York is an entire region. Everything sort of northeast of New York is a region. Region 12 is effectively everything west of the Rockies. Region 12 is enormous. All of California, all of Nevada, all of the Pacific Northwest, it's enormous. Because these regions were set back in the 1900s, when California was not that much, when California wasn't that great, when the country was very, very different, before our entire population started moving south and west. So there are 12 regional banks, and they're not at all balanced. Terrible balance on them. 12 regional banks, each of which has a president. So there's a president of each regional bank. I used to be able to name them, and nowhere close anymore. The western one is San Francisco. There's Denver, St. Louis, New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, maybe? I can't come close. I can get some of them. Look at your currency, and you look at the places your currency is from, and that's where central banks are located. There is a seven-member Federal Reserve Board. 7 members on the Federal Reserve Board. Members are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate for checks and balances. So the President appoints someone to the 7-member Federal Reserve Board. The Senate says, okay, that's fine. They serve a term of 14 years. Think about what you were doing 14 years ago. Federal Reserve governors serve a term of 14 years. These are called governors. The governors of the Federal Reserve System. It's an old British term. They cannot be impeached. They cannot be replaced. The only longer-term job in government is Supreme Court Justice, which is for life. Presidents come and go. Politicians come and go. The Federal Reserve remains. 14-year term. There is a chair and a vice chair, which come out of these 7. And they hold a chair or a vice chair for terms starting with 4 years, possibly picking up more years. So they can be reappointed. I think Alan Greenspan served 12 or 13 years as chairman of the Federal Reserve. The point here, the reason we have these long terms is to make these people non-political. They need to be non-political, all right? Supposedly, this should be an independent, objective, non-political office. They should act in the best interest of the economy, not for their party or an election or having to do something or please anyone. The point is to make them non-political and independent of any outside influence. I haven't erased anything, right, quickly. 7-member board here and 12 regional banks. These 19 people make up the Federal Open Market Committee. These 19 people make up the Federal Open Market Committee. All 7 of these have a vote, and 5 of these have a vote. So 7 plus 5, 12. 12 votes on the Federal Open Market Committee. The Federal Open Market Committee handles interest rates and other things that we'll talk about in the future. And by future, I mean 10 minutes.
Why 12 people? Isn't that
An even number?
Yeah.
And that's not great, but typically these folks are unanimous. Typically. There may be 1 or 2 hawks or doves on there, dissenters, but typically these guys go in pretty good lockstep. I don't think there's ever been a time. 5 of the regional bank presidents get to vote, and this rotates among them, except New York is always one of them. New York always gets to vote. The New York Fed president always sits on the Federal Open Market Committee and always gets to vote. Why? Because New York is the financial center of the freaking globe. All right? So they always get a vote. All 7 Fed board members get a vote. Right now, currently, as of October 2015, there are only 5 members on the Federal Reserve. There are 2 open vacant seats. For about the last, well, I'll say 7 years, we'll put it during the Obama administration, they have been playing politics with the Federal Reserve Board, which is a relatively new thing. About 3 years ago, they nominated Peter Diamond, who's an exceptional economist in every way. They nominated Peter Diamond to the Federal Reserve Board, and the Senate said he's not qualified. The Republican Senate said, we don't want him, he's not good enough to be on he's not qualified. Later that year, Peter Diamond was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. So they've been playing politics with the Fed, which is a really bad idea in every possible way. In no way is that smart. There's 2 nominees that are just waiting for the Senate to do their thing, and they're just playing politics and dragging their feet. Rand Paul of Kentucky is one of the biggest ones he's holding these hostage because he won't vote on them. It's just a terrible idea in every way. Very dangerous. Really overrides the non-political, independent nature of the Fed. And we only have a 5-member Fed board right now, and they have a lot to do, and shorting them 2 people is a big deal. Really a bad idea in every single way. We need those spots filled. Who is the current chair? Current chair is Janet Yellen. Let's go ahead and put Dr. Janet Yellen. An exceptional economist in every single solitary way. The first female head of the Federal Reserve in the U.S. She was previously the vice chair under Ben Bernanke. And after Ben Bernanke stepped down and his term was over, Janet Yellen was appointed the first female head of the Federal Reserve. She was a professor at Berkeley, and she was the president of that monstrous 12th region out of San Francisco. So for years she was the president of that monstrous region. Economics professor at Berkeley for many years. Also, she came out of Yale, which is unusual for a central banker, that she came from Yale. Yale is not known for macro, so unusual that she came out of Yale. The vice chair right now is Dr. Stanley Fischer. Dr. Fischer makes my list of top 10 smartest people on the planet. This guy's just extraordinary in every way. Before being appointed as vice chair under Janet Yellen, he was the head of the Bank of Israel. He was the head of Israel's central bank for about a dozen or so years. And as the rest of the global economy shrank into recession, Dr. Fischer just exploded the money supply in Israel and dropped interest rates to zero. He acted immediately. Israel had almost no recession, just floated right over. Now, is the economy of Israel a bit smaller than the U.S.? Of course, absolutely. But very well known, very well respected. Dr. Fischer went to MIT. MIT is well known for producing macroeconomists. Ben Bernanke, the previous Fed chair, got his PhD under Dr. Fischer, as did half of the Federal Open Market Committee, as did Olivier Blanchard, head of the IMF and former head of the French Central Bank. Dr. Fischer has trained half of the central bank heads around the world at MIT. Very well known and very, very well respected. I think they probably would have named him Fed chair if Yellen hadn't been waiting for so long and if he hadn't previously been the central banker in Israel. It's not like we can call someone up from the minors, right? But instead of naming him Fed chair, they named him vice. Really an extraordinary guy in every way. Really neat dude. I've met Dr. Fischer once. I've never met Dr. Yellen. But this is the current makeup of our Federal Reserve team. These are the chief economists of the U.S. Previous, Ben Bernanke. Previous to him, Alan Greenspan. Previous to Greenspan was Paul Volcker. And that takes us back to the late 70s. So since the late 70s, really within my lifetime, there have been 4 Fed chairs. Within my lifetime, there have been about 4 Fed chairs. Volcker, Greenspan, Bernanke, and now Yellen. Within that time, there have been what? 8 or 9 presidents? So Fed chairs hang around. Presidents come and go. Fed chairs hang around. Okay, so now we know what they're supposed to do, what they don't do, a little history behind the bank, and